The rain lashed against the cracked windows of the old archive, and Thomas Gray said, "This file is my only chance to uncover what happened to the Bismarck." His voice trembled, though not from fear, but from obsession. Eleanor Price said, "Thomas, you've been at this for days without rest." She placed a hand gently on the cold desk, her tone laced with worry. Thomas brushed away the concern, eyes locked on the faded naval report. "The truth has been hidden for decades, and I will bring it back to light," he whispered, every word pressing against the silence. Outside, thunder growled like an echo of the war long past, shadows darting across the room. Thomas said, "There are inconsistencies in the wreck reports that no historian can explain." Eleanor said, "Some mysteries are dangerous to chase." The wind howled, rattling loose papers, but Thomas's gaze sharpened. "Danger is irrelevant when history itself is lying to us," he replied with conviction. A single desk lamp flickered, illuminating his tired eyes and the jagged edges of photographs. Eleanor's lips trembled as she said, "If you keep pushing, you'll cross lines that cannot be uncrossed." His reply came slowly, almost reverently, "Then so be it. The Bismarck is waiting to speak." Thomas Gray said, "Every line in these reports has been rewritten to hide the truth." He dragged his pen across margins, filling them with angry notes. Eleanor Price said, "You sound like a man who sees ghosts in every shadow." The storm outside softened to rain, but the tension inside grew heavier. Thomas said, "The official story claims the wreck lies in silence, yet survivors whispered of tampering." His words carried both defiance and exhaustion. Eleanor paced near the shelves, her boots crunching old paper underfoot. "Some shadows are best left undisturbed," she murmured. Thomas said, "No shadow endures forever." His voice cracked, revealing the toll his obsession had taken. He clutched a photograph of the ship, its silhouette black against Atlantic waves. "The Bismarck has answers, and I will tear them free." Eleanor looked at him with sorrowful eyes, knowing the path ahead would swallow him whole. Thomas Gray said, "If I cross-reference these testimonies, the gaps become undeniable." He pressed pages together, lips tightening. Eleanor Price said, "And what if those gaps exist because they were meant to?" The room was heavy with history's weight. Thomas said, "History isn't sacred, it's manipulated." His voice was iron, echoing against the wooden shelves. Eleanor whispered, "Then you'll be fighting against an army of silence." His tired laughter echoed like glass breaking. "I've fought worse," Thomas said, eyes burning with reckless certainty. Outside, the storm gave way to eerie stillness, the calm before truth's unraveling. Thomas Gray said, "This survivor account contradicts everything the Navy declared." His finger jabbed at a typed page. Eleanor Price said, "Do you hear yourself? You're accusing governments of erasing history." His voice lowered, deadly calm. "Yes," Thomas replied, "and I intend to prove it." She exhaled sharply, arms crossed, the weight of his obsession pressing against her spirit. "What if you're wrong?" she asked. Thomas stared at the storm-faded map on the desk. "Then history will correct me," he whispered, "but if I'm right, they'll try to bury me with the ship." As silence stretched, Eleanor Price said, "There are people who will stop you, Thomas." Her voice broke like fragile glass. Thomas Gray replied, "Let them try. I've already given myself to this truth." His knuckles whitened against the desk edge. A gust of wind forced the window ajar, spraying rain across yellowed documents. Eleanor gasped, rushing to close it. "You're not listening," she said, trembling. Thomas whispered, "I hear only the Bismarck's silence, begging to be broken." She stared at him, realizing he had already crossed into obsession's abyss. Thomas Gray said, "The naval records don't align, Eleanor, they were altered." His eyes darted across redacted lines, fingers smudged with ink. Eleanor Price said, "You're risking your career chasing ghosts." Her voice cracked as she paced the archive's dim corridor. Thomas muttered, "This is more than history, it's a deliberate erasure." He slammed the file shut, the echo shaking dust from shelves. Eleanor pressed her hand against the wall, torn between loyalty and fear. "If this is true, Powerful men will stop you. Thomas replied, then they'll have to silence me. The desk lamp buzzed, casting harsh shadows across his tired features. Eleanor's footsteps echoed, and she whispered, you're pulling me into your storm. He said, you've already stepped inside. Silence lingered like thunder waiting to break, the room suffocating with secrets too heavy to breathe. The rain subsided, leaving a tense silence. Thomas Gray said, the keeper of secrets wants this buried. He pulled a marked folder, red stamps screaming classified. Eleanor Price said, you're saying someone still alive is hiding the truth? She stepped closer, her shadow crossing his notes. Thomas said, not just someone. An entire machine devoted to silence. His voice shook with restrained anger. Eleanor said, and you think you can fight it? He replied, truth doesn't need to win. It only needs to be exposed. She stared at him, torn between admiration and fear. Then what happens to you? She whispered. Thomas's silence was heavier than words, his eyes burning with the fire of obsession. Eleanor Price said, this is madness, Thomas. You'll be crushed under their weight. Her voice echoed against the shelves, trembling with fear. Thomas Gray replied, better crushed by truth than buried in lies. He stood, posture rigid, eyes alight with obsession. Eleanor turned away, her coat sweeping dust, but her voice softened. I don't want you to destroy yourself. Thomas said, then help me. Stand with me instead of against me. She froze, heart pounding, knowing her choice could shape both their fates. The silence between them was thick, a battlefield without gunfire, where every word was a weapon. Thomas Gray said, look at this. He held out a faded survivor's letter, ink bleeding from water damage. Eleanor Price stepped closer, her breath caught. This handwriting, it's trembling, she whispered. Thomas said, because they were terrified. He tapped the words. They sank her, but she did not fall alone. Eleanor's eyes widened, her voice breaking. What does that mean? Thomas leaned closer, eyes narrow. It means the Bismarck carried something more than steel and guns. Eleanor said, or it means you're twisting a dying man's words. Thomas's whisper cut like a blade. No, this is the crack in their lies. The storm had passed, but the room felt darker. Thomas Gray said, if I follow this letter, it leads to places untouched since the war. His voice burned with urgency. Eleanor Price said, and what if it leads you into their trap? He smirked faintly, eyes hollow. Then I've already walked into it. Eleanor pressed her hand over her mouth, fighting dread. You're obsessed, she whispered. He said, obsession is the only weapon against silence. A gust of wind rattled the archive window, though the rain was gone, as if the past itself stirred in warning. Thomas's eyes gleamed, not with hope but with inevitability. The tavern smelled of salt and smoke when Richard Hale said, I've heard whispers you seek the truth about the Bismarck. His smile was disarming, his eyes unreadable. Thomas Gray said, whispers travel fast when they're meant to be heard. He studied Richard with suspicion. Eleanor Price leaned back in her chair, her arms folded. You don't strike me as a man who deals in truth, she said. Richard laughed softly. Truth is a dangerous coin, and I trade only in what others fear. Thomas said, then you know the cost of lies. The tavern's lantern flickered, shadows moving like phantoms across the table. Richard's tone softened. I can help you, but only if you're willing to follow me into waters deeper than you imagine. Thomas's jaw tightened. I've already drowned myself in this search, he replied. Eleanor whispered, and who pulls us out if we sink? Silence hung like smoke, thick and suffocating. Richard Hale said, a ship like the Bismarck doesn't vanish without someone keeping the secret afloat. He sipped his drink, eyes glinting in candlelight. Thomas Gray replied, and you happen to know where the trail leads? Richard smirked. I know where it begins. The Atlantic hides more than wrecks. Eleanor Price said, and why should we trust you? Richard leaned closer, lowering his voice. Because trust isn't required, curiosity is. Thomas said, you play dangerous games. Richard replied, only with those who think they can win. Eleanor exhaled, her eyes narrowing, sensing the trap hidden within his charm. The sea rocked beneath the expedition vessel. Thomas Gray said, "This ship carries more than supplies, it carries answers." His voice mingled with the crash of waves. Eleanor Price said, "Or it carries you to ruin." She gripped the railing, wind whipping her hair. Richard Hale smirked, standing at the bow. "Fear is a fine companion, but it doesn't steer ships." Thomas glanced at him, mistrust boiling. "And what do you steer, Hale, secrets or lives?" Richard laughed, the sound stolen by the ocean's roar. "Both, when necessary," he replied. The vessel cut through the Black Sea, moonlight spilling across waves like broken glass. Below deck, the hum of engines vibrated the air. Eleanor Price said, "Something isn't right." She glanced at scattered charts, unease tightening her voice. Thomas Gray replied, "Sabotage doesn't announce itself, it hides in shadows." He adjusted his papers, every detail scrutinized. Richard Hale entered with a calm smile. "Storms brew inside ships as much as outside them," he said. Eleanor shot him a sharp look. "And some men bring storms with them." Richard chuckled, unshaken. Thomas said, "If anything threatens this search, it won't be the sea." His eyes locked on Hale's, suspicion as sharp as steel. The room seemed smaller, the air thicker, as if truth itself was waiting just beyond reach. A loud crack split the night, and the vessel lurched violently. Eleanor Price cried, "What was that?" Fear sharpened her voice. Thomas Gray braced himself against the table. "Sabotage," he growled as alarms blared. Richard Hale steadied himself, smirk unchanged. "Perhaps the sea itself rejects your quest." Eleanor shouted, "This is no accident." Thomas snapped, "Then we've been betrayed already." The ship groaned, water spraying through fractured seams. Eleanor's face paled, eyes wide with terror. Thomas's voice cut through the chaos. "Whoever did this wants us blind in the water." Richard's silence was more dangerous than his words, his calm presence like a dagger waiting to strike. In the quiet corner of the ship, Henry Adler said, "My father went down with the Bismarck." His voice shook, haunted by memories too heavy to bear. Thomas Gray said, "Then you've carried this ghost longer than anyone." Henry's eyes darkened. "He wrote me once, days before the battle, words I've never understood." Eleanor Price leaned forward, her voice soft. "What did he say, Henry?" He unfolded a weathered letter, hands trembling. He wrote, "The ship is more than steel. It carries a secret I may never live to reveal." Thomas's breath caught, obsession blazing. "This is it, the proof we've needed." Henry shook his head. "It's a curse, not proof. My life was shattered by these words." Eleanor whispered, "And now you've given them to us." Silence wrapped around the three, broken only by the hum of engines and Henry's quiet grief. Thomas Gray said, "This letter changes everything. It means the wreck is more than history, it's evidence." He paced the cabin, clutching his notes. "Eleanor Price said evidence of what, Thomas? A ship is a ship." Her voice carried doubt, but also fear. Henry Adler whispered, "He warned me once that not all men on that ship were sailors." Thomas stopped, eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" Henry swallowed hard. "He said some wore uniforms, but spoke in riddles of power and science." Eleanor gasped. "Hidden passengers?" Thomas said, "Or hidden cargo." His voice was sharp, like steel cutting through fog. Henry's shoulders slumped. "And I've spent my life afraid of what my father never told me." The cabin shook slightly as the storm rolled outside, the weight of history pressing down. Eleanor Price said, "If what Henry's father wrote is true, the Bismarck wasn't sunk for strategy alone." Her voice trembled with the realization. Thomas Gray replied. It was silenced deliberately. He slammed his notebook shut, sparks of fury in his eyes. Henry Adler whispered, "I've feared these words all my life. I never wanted them to breathe again." Thomas said, "But they will. Secrets rot in silence." Eleanor turned sharply. "And if the truth destroys us along with it?" Thomas's reply was ice. Then, at least we'll drown knowing what pulled us under. Henry lowered his head, tears streaking his cheeks. You sound like my father, he said, his voice broken. Thomas stared out the porthole into the Black Sea. Then perhaps his voice still speaks through me. Later that night, the deck creaked beneath the storm's weight. A shadow emerged, cloaked in rain. Samuel Dyer said, "You've stirred things best left buried." His voice carried across the deck like a warning. Thomas Gray turned sharply. "And who are you to decide what history reveals?" Eleanor Price stepped beside him, her coat soaked, hair plastered to her face. "This isn't the time," she said softly. Samuel's eyes glinted. "I've seen men torn apart for less than what you carry." Thomas replied coldly, "Then they'll have to tear me apart too." Samuel leaned closer, whispering through the rain. "The sea has a way of swallowing those who pry too deep." His figure vanished into shadow, as thunder cracked, leaving only dread behind. Thomas Gray gripped the railing, waves crashing violently below. Eleanor Price said, "That man knows more than he admits." Her words barely rose above the storm. Thomas replied, "He knows enough to fear the truth, which means we're closer than ever." Henry Adler stood nearby, clutching his father's letter against his chest. "This search will destroy us," he said, his voice breaking. Thomas said, "It will only destroy the lies." Eleanor whispered, "And what if we're standing in the crossfire of both?" Lightning cracked, illuminating their faces, obsession, fear, and grief woven together. Thomas's voice rose above the roar. The Bismarck sank, but its silence won't sink with it. The sea answered with another crash, as if warning him that truth demanded sacrifice. The cabin's lamp flickered when Richard Hale said, "You never realized I was guiding you." His smirk carved deep lines across his face. Thomas Gray's fists clenched. "You've been feeding us poison." Eleanor Price gasped, her voice trembling. "You lied to us, Hale." Richard shrugged, calm as ever. "Lies? No. I gave you pieces, but never the whole." Thomas's voice cut sharp. "You betrayed us." Richard leaned back. "I betrayed no one. I only served the truth that benefits me." Henry Adler rose, fury shaking his voice. "You used my father's memory." Richard's smirk widened. "And you let me. The past is a weapon, Henry, and you handed me the blade." Thunder roared as silence thickened, every gaze locked on Hale's cold smile. Eleanor Price shouted, "You've endangered us all." Her voice cracked under fury and fear. Richard Hale leaned forward. "Endangered? No, I've kept you alive. Without me you'd already be lost." Thomas Gray slammed his fist on the table. "You've been playing both sides." Hale's eyes narrowed. "Every game needs a dealer, Thomas, and I chose to be one." Henry Adler's voice trembled. "You're no ally. You're the reason we've been sabotaged." Richard smirked coldly. Perhaps you've simply mistaken survival for betrayal." Eleanor whispered, "You're a monster." Hale laughed quietly. "No, Eleanor. I'm the only realist among dreamers drowning in ghosts." Thomas Gray said, "You lured us into your game, but why?" His voice thundered like the storm outside. Richard Hale's grin faded, his tone sharper. "Because you're tools. Each of you led me closer to what I need." Eleanor Price stepped forward, defiance in her trembling frame. "We aren't tools. We're people." Hale's reply was ice. "People are only valuable when useful." Henry Adler's voice broke. "My father died with dignity, and you spit on his grave." Richard leaned closer, whispering like venom. "Your father carried a secret worth killing for. He was no hero, just a man holding treasure he couldn't guard." Silence froze the air, betrayal tearing through every heart. The storm raged louder as Eleanor Price said, "This ship carries more than cargo. It carries your betrayal." Richard Hale chuckled. "Betrayal? No, Eleanor. Truth wears many faces." Thomas Gray stepped closer, his voice low and deadly. "Then show us your true face." Hale's eyes narrowed. I already have. You just refuse to see it. Henry Adler shouted. You're nothing but a coward hiding in lies. Richard smirked. Coward? No, Henry. I'm a survivor, and survival demands sacrifice. Thunder cracked above, shaking the walls. Thomas's eyes blazed. If survival is your creed, then you'll die clutching it. Thorm howled as Thomas Gray said, We're finished with your games, Hale. Richard's smirk faltered, replaced by chilling calm. You think you can continue without me? You'd be blind. Eleanor Price said, We'd rather be blind than betrayed. Her voice carried steel. Henry Adler slammed his fist against the table. My father's memory won't be twisted anymore. Richard leaned back slowly, eyes glinting. Then you've chosen death, all of you. Thomas's gaze hardened. If death is the price for truth, then I'll pay it. Silence fell, broken only by thunder. Richard's smile returned faintly, but for the first time his eyes betrayed fear. The submersible groaned as steel pressed against the ocean's weight. Thomas Gray said, Every meter we sink pulls us closer to the truth. His breath fogged the glass. Eleanor Price whispered, Or closer to a grave. Her eyes were wide, reflecting dim red lights. Henry Adler clutched his father's letter, his knuckles pale. He wrote of secrets lying in darkness. Henry muttered, voice trembling. The abyss outside swallowed all light, endless black pressing in. Thomas pressed his hand against the viewport. This is where silence begins to break. Eleanor said, If the sea doesn't take us first. The engines hummed, groans echoing like a heartbeat from the deep. Henry whispered, Father, what did you hide here? The sonar beeped faintly, echoing through the cramped cabin. Eleanor Price said, Something massive lies ahead. Her voice cracked as the blip grew stronger. Thomas Gray leaned forward. The Bismarck, he whispered, reverence burning in his eyes. Henry Adler shook his head, trembling. Or its grave. The submersible lights cut into the abyss, illuminating nothing but drifting silt. Eleanor muttered, It feels like we're being watched. Thomas didn't look away. We are, by history itself. Henry closed his eyes, whispering, Father, forgive me for following your ghost. The sonar beep quickened, like a heartbeat pounding louder with every second. The beams finally cut across twisted steel. Eleanor Price gasped, There it is. Her voice shook. The shattered hull of the Bismarck loomed like a corpse. Thomas Gray whispered, We found her. His eyes burned with awe and obsession. Henry Adler's face collapsed into grief. It's a tomb, he said. The wreck stretched endlessly, jagged metal and broken turrets cloaked in silt. Eleanor shivered. It feels wrong, like it's still alive. Thomas pressed closer. No, it's speaking to us. Henry muttered, Not every voice should be heard. Silence pressed heavy as the sub drifted along the wreck's ruined spine. Thomas Gray said, Look closer. Lights revealed sections of plating scorched unnaturally. Eleanor Price whispered, That's not battle damage. Her voice was unsteady. Henry Adler's hands shook. My father, he knew this wasn't ordinary. Thomas muttered, Something was hidden, and someone made sure it never surfaced. Eleanor said, Or someone made sure it sank. The sub's camera swept over gaping holes too clean for torpedoes. Thomas's voice grew fierce. They tampered with the wreck. They tried to erase it. Henry whispered, Erase what? Silence followed, the answer lingering in the cold, dark steel. The wreck groaned as currents stirred, steel grinding faintly. Eleanor Price said, It feels alive, like it doesn't want us here. Her voice was barely audible. Thomas Gray whispered, It wants to speak. His face lit with fervor. Henry Adler clutched the letter, tears streaming. And it wants blood to keep its silence. The sub drifted past, shattered guns and collapsed decks, the silence crushing. Eleanor pressed her hand to glass. We shouldn't be here. Thomas said, We're exactly where we need to be. Thunder from the surface storm echoed faintly above, like war drums calling from the past. The wreck loomed like a grave when Richard Hale's voice crackled through the sub's comm. "You've gone too far," he said, his tone cold. Thomas Gray clenched his fists. "You followed us." Hale replied, "I was always ahead of you." Eleanor Price said, "You tried to bury the truth with steel and water." Hale's laugh was bitter. "The truth belongs to those who can control it." Henry Adler shouted, "My father died for this secret. You'll not bury him again." Thomas's voice shook with fury. "No more games, Hale. This ends now." The wreck's silence seemed to listen, steel bones echoing their conflict. Richard Hale said, "The Bismarck was never just a warship. It carried something they feared more than defeat." Eleanor Price whispered, "What was it?" His voice chilled the cabin. "A cargo of mines, scientists stolen from across Europe, buried beneath steel." Henry Adler gasped, clutching his letter. "My father knew." Thomas Gray's jaw tightened. "That's why she was silenced." Hale said, "Yes. Knowledge drowned with the ship, knowledge that could break empires." Eleanor's voice cracked. "You betrayed us to protect it." Hale replied, "No, to own it." Thomas's eyes burned. "Then it dies with you." The sub shook as pressure groaned. Richard Hale said, "You can't bring this truth back. Even if you survive, they'll erase you." Thomas Gray snapped, "Let them try. History can't erase what's already spoken." Eleanor Price said, "Thomas, this will kill you." His reply was calm, almost reverent. "If it costs my life, it's worth it." Henry Adler whispered, "Then my father's curse continues." Hale's voice softened, "Dangerous. You'll drown, and I'll remain." Thomas leaned closer to the speaker. "No, you'll be remembered as the man who failed to silence ghosts." Silence pressed heavy, broken only by the sea's groans. A sudden crack split the silence as the wreck shifted. Eleanor Price cried, "The ship's moving." Thomas Gray shouted, "She's not dead, she's still fighting." Henry Adler's tears streamed. "She's carrying them even now," he whispered. Richard Hale's voice thundered, "The sea protects its secrets." Thomas snapped, "Not anymore." The sub's floodlights illuminated torn steel, revealing a hidden chamber sealed within. Eleanor gasped, "It's real." Hale's voice quivered for the first time. "Close it. Don't open what was never meant to see light." Thomas's eyes burned. "Then we will open it, even if it kills us." The chamber yawned open, blackness within. Thomas Gray whispered, "Here lies the truth." Eleanor Price's voice broke. "And here we're lost." Henry Adler clutched the letter, whispering, "Father, your burden is mine now." Richard Hale shouted, "If you step inside, you'll never leave." Thomas's gaze hardened. "Better to die with truth than live with lies." Silence hung heavy, then Eleanor whispered, "Then we go together." Henry nodded slowly. The wreck groaned as if mourning. Thomas pressed his hand to the glass, eyes wet but unbroken. "The Bismarck has spoken," he said softly. The sea's roar swallowed his words.